to my book was because I wanted to check those dates. And we were watching this as it happened, Ed. So we didn't have, 20/20 hindsight. We were watching it as it happened. We were reporting it live. So every day something came up, we would talk about it. And that burglary occurred on the 26th, period. It did not occur on the 24th. So not only did, Ted Rowlands not see a van that day, he might have seen, there may have been a van across the street, but the burglary at the Medina house took place on the 26th. And if those burglars who were over there were so bungling as to get caught burglarizing the Medina home, how were they smart enough to kill Laci, hold her body, wait for them to find out where Scott was fishing, take a dead body down to the bay and plant it? That is preposterous. The odds against that are, ridiculously high. The odds that Peterson did it are really, really good, okay? 1 to 1, all right? If he was a horse, he would be like, you wouldn't even make any money on it because you wouldn't even get your money back. But so this preposterous idea that someone else murdered Laci, it wouldn't be preposterous if there was a single shred of evidence that pointed to that. But there isn't. There isn't any motive, means, or opportunity for anyone else to have done it. So I'm not saying that everyone who gets convicted and put on death row is guilty. We know that's not true. All right. We know that there are people who are unfairly convicted or who have terrible trials. But this guy had $1 million attorney. He had every advantage in the world. He had white privilege, if you want to call it that. And he had a 5.5 month long trial with no expense spared. And he was not unfairly convicted. The evidence was amazing. And I watched closely this A&E show to see if they talked about any of the really important things, like the computer files, like his computer searches, like his money issues. He was, in debt. He was, had all kinds of financial problems. He had a real fishy job, as you and I discussed in our last show. And he might have had other, issues going on that we don't even know about, let alone the fact that he had been philandering on the side. That's the least of it. They act like the media made a big deal out of him having an affair. Well, that's just because sex sells. We know that. But that's not the worst of Scott Peterson's problems.
But the thing is, it is a big deal when you tell your girlfriend, my wife is gone. My wife is, no longer with me.
This is the first Christmas without my wife.
Right. How would he know that? Like, how would he, if you know what I mean? Because she turned up missing after that statement. And if he was so serious about this girl, how would he justify this later on? He was going to have to explain to her one day, well, my wife's alive, we're getting divorced. Or my wife disappeared. You know what I mean? It's just...
he was planning it, obviously. It's logic. Yeah. He was planning it. He bought the boat the day after he made that comment to her, or within days of it. We're talking about December 9th, December 10th. He told Amber this was the first Christmas without his wife, and he bought that boat within the next couple of days.
So, but the defense theory is that, well, whoever killed her, they planted the body where he was fishing that day. They planted the body. So now, just think. So first of all, the cops are still searching for that body. You know what I mean? You're going to take a chance and go back to the scene of the crime, where they're looking, where the cops are looking. You're going to take a chance to go back there, and you're going to put the body there?
Right, they were back there that next day, absolutely. Plus, there was a $50,000 reward for any information that would have led to finding Laci. And who would pass that up if they knew where she was?
Well, that's tricky. I don't know. I don't think I would risk that. Like if I did the murder, I wouldn't try and collect the reward under any circumstances because it's too risky. But I don't think I would dispose of the body just to frame the guy and think, well, that's because I'm already off the hook. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Nobody would do that. Yeah. That never happens.
Yeah.
If it's never happened, I've probably read 100 crime books, and that's never happened. Now, people bury things, and they dig them back up again and move them because they're worried about him being found. But they don't plant him in a body, and they don't plant him in the water to frame someone else. Now, people frame other people, but they don't go to that kind of risk. Never mind, think about how they would have to do that. Think about the logistics involved in getting a boat, getting that body, being unseen, taking that chance of taking a dead body out of your trunk and throwing it in the back of a boat. I mean, there's the whole thing is just crazy. There's 1,000 things that can go wrong from A to Z on that.
And
1,000.
It would have to change from a murder of opportunity, you just happen to stumble on this woman or during a burglary or whatever, to then a murder of planning and, storing a body for months, and then going back to the scene of the crime. Now, what about all this business though about how Connor, the baby, they measured the baby and they came up with the wrong date? He must have been 10 days old or something. What did he come up with?
No, there were two, natal experts. There were two, prenatal doctor experts that came on, and the one that worked for Garrigus was really an idiot. He picked the date of conception being the day that Laci told her friends that she was pregnant, instead of 2 weeks prior to that. So he made the baby. He figured out the whole gestational age based on the wrong date. I mean, we all know how that works. It's 40 weeks, okay? And if you had a baby, it takes 40 weeks. 2 weeks, from your last period to conception, and then 9 months after that. So you have 38 weeks of gestation and 40 weeks they call it a 40-week pregnancy, because they count the date of conception as they count it back 2 weeks. So anyway, he had the wrong date to begin with. And also, Garrigus was trying to prove in that testimony that the baby was older than, the 24th, that he was, that the baby had lived longer based on the size. Now, that's also determined by femur and, bone length, etc. Now, I don't know about Laci because, of course, this was her first and only pregnancy. We don't know what size baby that was going to be at full gestation. I mean, I had a 10-pound kid, so I guarantee you at 8 months that baby was 8 pounds. And any doctor in the world could have said, hey, that's a full-term baby, but he still had another month to go. So, that whole thing is was so, I guess, irrelevant, because the baby could not have lived outside Laci if Laci, had been murdered. First of all, the baby would die instantly with her. That's it. That's his life support. And secondly, if the baby was cut out of her body, which, is a gruesome idea. I mean, just the whole idea is just so macabre. And then lived, what purpose would that have served to put a cord around that baby's neck and throw it in the water? I mean, none of it makes any sense in any way. And besides the fact that if you've ever been in the water for any length of time, if you're a sailor, if you're a marina person, or if you even live on water and you play in the water, you know that debris can accumulate and twist around things so easily that a little baby tossed in those waves for a couple hours from probably 8 hours, which is a miracle that baby survived. I don't mean the baby survived, but I mean that the body was intact at all. Because, there was marine life that could have gotten to it. There were rocks that could have gotten it caught in. I mean, the fact that baby landed on that shore intact is kind of a miracle in itself. And the fact that it had debris wrapped around it and twine around its neck, it was not placed there by a human being. It was part of the debris from that baby being, floated along, bounced around the top of that water for that length, for that mile that baby was tossed. Can you imagine?
Right.
I mean, that whole idea.
Just think, the defense theory is that, because there was some tape found around the baby's head and stuff like that, that the idea is that they planted this body there in order to frame Scott, but at the same time left tape on the baby's head, which would totally distract away from blaming Scott, because there's no way the baby was outside the mother on the day of the 26th of Christmas.
Right, perfect. Right. There's no way the baby would have been removed from her in order to plant, to frame Scott, because Scott would certainly not have removed the baby. So to frame Scott based on that, again, that's exactly correct. Nobody would believe that. That's ridiculous. So, if you're going to frame Scott Peterson, leave the body in the house.
That's all right, or near the house, right? Yeah.
Right. He wasn't home. Just pop her back in there.
Now, and
have them find her.
The other thing is that they're saying, well, okay, it was a satanic cult because the hands are missing, and the cults do that. You know, they would like the hands, they save the hands, they do remove the head, like Bundy did. That's okay. Well, that's possible, and they would want to sacrifice a newborn baby, and they would want to do it on a holiday like Christmas. What do you mean? But even that doesn't exclude Scott. Well, maybe Scott was in on the cult, even if it was a cult. Okay, because I got some messages on YouTube. Ed, it was dissected in this way, and it had to be a cult. Even if it was a cult, there's nothing to say that Scott wasn't in that cult. That doesn't exclude Scott. That doesn't, And what's more likely?
True.
Right.
True.
And what's more likely? You look at the case in Matamoros, Mexico. That drug cult that was sacrificing people down there, that was a drug cult, and they were doing that to be invisible to the DEA. What was Scott up to? Okay, with all that business going on.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Well, I don't think it goes that deep.
Yeah, me neither.
I don't disregard. You talk about satanic cults in your radio program that and I don't rule out that exists whatsoever. However, this is not one of those cases. All right. Again, it's like I don't rule out that people plant bodies to frame others. I don't rule that out. I don't rule out that people are unfairly convicted. I don't rule out that there are satanic cults. But in this case, it just doesn't hold up. There's absolutely no evidence at all to show that. Now, if you give me some evidence, if Garrigus had presented one single witness, I would have said, okay, maybe there's something to it. But he didn't. He didn't even put the dog walkers on. He didn't even present the dog walkers that supposedly saw a woman that resembled Laci. He didn't put a single one of those people on the stand. So they're on this A&E special, Maldonado and the whole crew, saying, hey, the police never followed up. Well, Garrigus knew about these people. It was in the discovery. That stuff was public information within 6 months. And if Garrigus wanted them, Dalton interviewed him because he wrote about him in his book, and he was an investigator for the defense. So any one of those people could have been called to the witness stand for the defense, and Garrigus did not call a single one. So either A, their stories weren't any good, they were not credible, or they contradicted each other, which they did in some cases because the timelines didn't work and he couldn't get it to work. And then either that or he's incompetent. Now, I'm not saying Garrigus is not incompetent, but he's not that incompetent that he wouldn't have put those guys on there, right?
Yeah, and even I don't think his acting was very convincing. That he thinks, all my alcohol therapy, and this is the most case I've ever been upset with. I don't even think he pulled that off. Now, you were mentioning too about the media. The media was kind of out of control in this case.
It was. I agree. But whose fault was that? Peterson was his own worst enemy. He could have done so many things differently to get some sympathy, to gain some reasonable doubt, to have people think, wow, this guy really is the most unlucky guy in the world. But instead, he dodged. He avoided he didn't go on any searches. He went to the golf course. He rented cars and looked at the search via the Richmond, the Richmond stadium there, the racetrack. He dodged the cops when they finally came down to get him in San Diego. He took him on that couple hours long chase a la OJ. This is not the way an innocent guy behaves. An innocent guy does not, we could say, well, I'm going to get arrested now that these bodies surface, so I'm going to, hightail it to Mexico. Okay, I might grant you that possibility that you might say, I'm going to hightail it out of here because I've been framed for this. And it's kind of like the old story, like, well, they're going to throw me in jail, so I'm going to get away, and I'm really innocent. But he did not act like an innocent guy from day one. He tried to sell the house. He sold her car. I know they repoed his truck, which is another thing I wanted to correct from our last conversation. They repoed they took his truck into evidence, so he bought another truck instead of using an already paid for Roadrunner. What did he have? He had a Land Rover that he tried to sell. So here he is trying to sell Laci's car, trying to sell the house they lived in, living in part of the time in Berkeley with his sister-in-law, or his sister Ann Bird, who was Ann Grady, and then going to Mexico, or pardon me, to San Diego to hide out with his family. I mean, that's not how an innocent guy behaves.
Yeah, even if you believe their theory that he was going down there to play golf, kind of odd he'd want to go play golf down there on a